For the clarity of everything, I'd like you to explain to people what Martyn's Law actually is. What do the principles actually set out to achieve?
Okay, so Martyn's Law is a set of 5 principles that are actually fairly straightforward. The first one being that the government have made available to every single one of you, the general public, a 45-minute e-learning package that you can access via, is it Act Awareness e-learning. If you Google that, it's 45 minutes of your time, and it may one day save your life, if you never know. So we would like the government to make it legislation that organizations actually make it mandatory to have that training for their staff. Number 2 would be that organizations and venue and event organizers do a risk assessment, just in terms of anything that they might be able to improve, and that they then, any risks I've identified, that they mitigate those as much as possible, that they also have in place a terrorist action plan in case of an event happening. And the last one is that for bigger events, that they work together with local government.
So I think we need to be clear. Who do we really need to be paying attention to this? Who in the we've got venue organisers in venues as well. Is it just for management level people to understand this, or do we need to get the message out to everyone at every level?
I think it has to be big venues as well as very tiny places, but I would say Martyn's Law can't be a one-size-fits-all. It's got to be proportionate.
Obviously, I think few of us can relate to the tragedy that you experienced. I mean, can you tell us about Martyn? What sort of guy was he?
Okay, Martyn was a laugh a minute. He absolutely embraced life. He was 29 and a half when he attended. He attended all pop concerts at the Arena in Manchester because he loved pop music. He even got thrown out of a Leona Lewis concert once because he sang too loud and it disrupted her singing. But that's nothing unusual for him. So he loved life. He always pulled my leg in particular. He was just living life 100 miles an hour, really.
Lovely. Nick, I'd like to bring you into the conversation to look at the bigger picture, and maybe you can try to articulate for us, how has the terror threat changed over the last decade?
So it's changed massively. Those of you in the audience who look a bit like me, which sadly isn't many of you, might remember the old Irish Republican terrorism, which was very focused on destroying infrastructure and bringing the government to a negotiating table over a particular cause, which was a nationalist cause. Since the late 90s, we've seen a shift from terrorism into radical Islam and people adopting a very toxic approach to how they seek to espouse their view of the world. Now, in the early days, that manifested itself in sort of high-value terrorism, people attempting to attack high-value targets. And of course, the most notable of those would have been the Twin Towers in 2001. And I'm still looking at some of you thinking you still weren't born then, were you? But since then, it's shifted substantially. And in 2014, an organisation that called itself the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, also known as Daesh, also known as Islamic State, they found an unoccupied piece of territory in northern Iraq and southern Syria. And they effectively set it up and declared an independent country, which they called the Caliphate. And the Caliphate is a religious context that they have. And it was lawless, absolutely lawless. And they started to call for people to come and fight their cause because clearly Iraq and Syria didn't want people occupying that territory. And so we had lots of foreigners coming into that area to fight. And governments were very, very effective at stopping that from happening. In the UK, we had about 800 fighters actually leave the UK and go and join the fight. About 400 of those came back and were arrested, 200 have been killed, and about 200 we don't know where they are. But recognising that things weren't going so well with that tactic, a man called Al-Adnani made a speech And the speech through social media and the internet was broadcast across the world. And he basically said, those of you who believe in our cause, stay where you are in your own countries, pick up a knife, pick up a rock, use a car, kill the infidel in any way you can. And since then, we have seen a complete change in how terrorism happens. And effectively, anybody can be a terrorist now, self-radicalizing on the internet. They can use anything as a weapon. And as we saw so shockingly in 2017, and impacted so dramatically on Figen's life, they will attack anywhere. And that hasn't changed. And we don't expect it to change.
Do you think that there's an element of complacency among event organisers, and that perhaps, there's that age-old thing, well, it won't happen to me, what are the odds?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I've seen that time again, and now I'm no longer a serving senior police officer. I can rant a bit more publicly than I used to be able to. And I'll give you a great example. I'm going to do a bit of shaming here now. Last year, I was visiting Oxford, the largest street event in the UK, about a mile-long fair every year happens there, and their token gesture for keeping vehicles out of a crowd of about 1,000 people, it was relatively early morning, it goes up to thousands of people in the evening, was a set of plastic barriers. Very similar to the plastic barriers that only this week were driven through at a carnival in Germany. I think the current injury toll on that is about 45 people. Very similar to the lightweight metal barriers that were protecting a celebratory event in Nice in 2016 that resulted in 82 people being murdered by a vehicle. So I see complacency all the time, and it's a shocking thing to see, quite frankly, because we need to know better, or we should know better. And I think the message to get across to everybody is you don't have to be complacent, and not being complacent doesn't cost you lots of money. It really doesn't, and maybe we'll talk about that in a moment.
Absolutely. I mean, the term events is quite broad, and when we're talking about implementing airport-style security and other such things, I suppose it's easier in a relative term, easier to implement at a large event, an exhibition like this, or a music concert. But what about smaller events? A lot of the people in the audience here will be, running conferences for maybe only 20 or 50 people. We cast our mind back to what happened at Fishmongers Hall in November. Now, given, I think, in that particular circumstance, the content was quite extreme because it was serving convicts. But what message can we give to those who are running smaller events to take more care when it comes to security?
So Figen and I are adamant that Martyn's Law should apply across the entire spectrum of business to which the public have access on payment or reward, is the sort of phrase I'm using at the moment. But in fairness, the government have announced consultation, and it's absolutely right that people have a voice in what this looks like. Security doesn't have to be high-end bag scanners, metal detecting arches, and goodness knows what else. It can be simple awareness. And the package that Figen referenced just now, if you go online and do it, you'll see it gives you an awareness of what looks wrong. And if you're running an event, one presumes that you need to be responsible for the people in your event. You probably are already in terms of health and safety. So the security element of that is just another quite small element that you just need to think about. And the other thing is, this is about protecting your revenues as well. If you're running an event and anybody can pile in and disrupt it, or take advantage of the hospitality that might be taking place, or obtain intellectual property from it, then you're doing yourself out of money, quite frankly. Whereas what you could be doing is just having somebody on the door checking who's coming in. And trust me, that is a deterrent. We see that as a deterrent all the time. So we've just had a conviction only this week of a woman who wanted to bomb St. Paul's Cathedral. And she had visited that location, and she'd looked at what the security looked like. And she came to the conclusion that it wasn't good enough to stop her from doing what she wanted to do. Whereas actually, if it had looked a bit different, it possibly could. And again, I'll do a little bit of shaming here. I came into an event today, shall we say, and there was security. There was visible security, but it was chatting to each other. It really wasn't doing a lot at all. So, security can be quite minimal, but still be very, very effective. I
mean, I guess my view on it really is that local authorities have a role to play here. And I know in Manchester, Manchester City Council are implementing the principles of Martyn's Law through licensing criteria to venues. So in lieu of legislation, certainly that's got to be, a positive step, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was at the last licensing committee meeting, they invited me along, and they were talking about whether local authority can get involved. For instance, at the end of a concert or a football match, the local authority could maybe change the timing of traffic lights to make the traffic flow quicker, to empty car parks quicker and get people out of crowded places easier. It's a simple measure, but so effective,
So there is obviously going to be a cost element, and it's a vulgar angle to the conversation, but it's one that needs to be had. I guess that a venue should supply a minimum level of security to a point, and then it would be up to the organizer, depending on their content, to have additional security based on that. What's your kind of views on that, Nick?
So Martyn, I recognise that for any business, the bottom line is probably what drives it. I mean, we're all passionate about what we do for a living, but we probably wouldn't do it if it didn't create some sort of profit at the end of the day. So the important thing about Martyn's Law is for the vast majority of people, it should cost absolutely nothing. Because what we've seen time and time again, and this isn't Nick Aldworth, the former National Counterterrorism Coordinator speaking, this is the voice of victims and survivors of terrorism speaking. What they tell us is when they're caught up in the middle of these things, they want somebody to help them and show them what needs to happen. They want somebody to know whether they should lock the doors or usher you out of the building. They want people to know whether, if they lock you in the storeroom for potentially 24 hours, somebody, since you can go into lockdown for a long time, there might at least be a bottle of water or a telephone in there. They want you to have a plan. And the most basic elements of Martyn's Law are the awareness through free training and the plan, which quite frankly, most of you, I said to you now, go back to your office and see what puts the hairs on the back of your neck up a little bit, and how would you deal with it if something bad happened here today. You could have that plan. Because if you don't have a plan before the incident, trust me, the panic will kick in and you'll lose control very quickly. And as I say, I go back to this piece about you've probably got this obligation already through health and safety in some respects, particularly around fire. And actually, there are people now researching the law and suggesting whether, occupier liability actually kicks in as well. The other thing I would say to you is that good security is good business. And it's not because I'm jaded and worried about things, but I will generally migrate to places where I feel safe and secure. I won't tend to go to places where I don't feel like that. So I definitely won't go to a street fair unless I can see that it's protected and well looked after. Not because of terrorism, not because of crime, but because some drunken idiot might drive down the middle of the street and wipe people out. So, good security is good business. And the last thing I'd leave you with, if anybody here represents a PLC or regularly works with the PLCs, there's a great piece of research that says if you've planned, those companies that plan for terrorism, both how to deal with it and how to recover from it, at the point of incident, they normally put about 12% on their share price. Those who haven't usually lose about 7%. That's big money for a lot of people, and it's well worth thinking about because security is not expensive and does not need to be expensive. It can be very, very inexpensive and free at times.
So I've read, I believe it was this week, Securities Minister James Brokenshire has certainly, forgive me, I haven't read the full article, it was only drawn to my attention this morning, but there's certainly positive murmurings from Westminster. Figen, can you maybe give us an update on where we are lobbying government? What stage are we at? Is everyone on board?
Yeah, so I've had a phone call of the new minister. He rang me very kindly last Friday to introduce himself and also to say that, the government is taking Martyn's Law serious and they will actually implement a consultation in the spring with businesses and venues so that they can establish what measures to put in place. And I think that's really, really encouraging. And I'm glad we're finally heard.
Absolutely. Nick, I mean, from your perspective, the government, they're going to have to be taking this seriously. Are you confident with your experience that they'll be looking at every aspect of the events industry? Because we know it's £43 billion to the UK. the identity crisis means that people think events, they think wedding planners and concert organisers and things like that, but we know that there's a whole raft of business events out there as well which will fall into this bracket. Will the government be taking this into account, do you think?
So I'm smiling to myself gently because in 2017 I didn't know Figen at all, and immediately after the Manchester Arena attack was when we started thinking, you know what, this country really needs a protective security duty, and we started talking about it with the then Home Office officials. And at one point, I was actually banned from mentioning it in meetings. They got so fed up with us going on about it. And I'm smiling because what a difference the government makes. And we have a very bullish government now with a very big majority, and whether you're Conservative, Labour, Liberal, and quite frankly, I don't really care. We have a government that wants to make things happen. And the fact that a security minister, and bearing in mind this is a guy who's responsible for the economic security of the country, the counterterrorism security of the country, the security services, this is not a guy who hasn't got a very big in tray. He takes the time out to to speak to Figen. His predecessor met with us. Boris Johnson has recently written to part of our campaign group to reassert his commitment to making this happen. I'm feeling more confident than I've ever felt that this is going to happen, and indeed we were talking to our good friend Brendan Cox, whose wife Jo Cox, the MP, was murdered, and he phrased it as, it's now not the if, it's the when and how. So the bit I would ask all of you to do is keep your eyes open for when the consultation opens, because the best law comes from contributions and consultation. And this will affect your industry. And some of you will be thinking there now, oh my goodness me, this is going to cost us a fortune. Some of you, I hope, will have picked up the message that it won't. But please, when that consultation comes out, look at it, think about what it means for your specific business or the likely sorts of events and environments in which you operate, and please give your feedback to government. I've got quite strong views around this. I sat in a chair responsible over a time when too many people were murdered. Figen's son was murdered. We have quite strong views around what the world should look like, but we also respect the fact that that's not the view that everybody has, and so consultation is critical, so please, please, please participate in that.
And of course, we, Conference News Magazine, we're going to be covering this subject extensively. So we'll obviously work with you guys to keep the message as fresh and as relevant, as up to date as possible, and through the other mass media titles as well. So please always make sure you are staying up to date. And I guess it's important for people to know that change is coming. But don't be scared. You have to embrace this new era of more sensible security.
You've got the chance to inform this. You have the chance to help us create what this looks like. And I could get very technical about this, but actually protective security in counterterrorism terms is about the only element in counterterrorism that isn't currently covered by legislation. All the other sort of bits are. But the last thing I would just say is I quite rightly acknowledge that most people will see terrorism as a once-in-a-lifetime event that probably won't come anywhere near you, and I'm so pleased that that's the case. But actually, the law will cater for what we refer as high harm as well. So it will refer to gangs trying to bust into your music event and sell drugs. It will cater for fights outside your licensed premises. It will enable you and empower you to think about the worst case events that are generated by violence, whatever the ideology or cause of that is. So counterterrorism, big scary subject, but actually this is just as much about high harm violence as it is anything else.
And I guess it's very pertinent because, as we were discussing over coffee before, the events industry struggles with a clear-cut identity, but you all support other industries. So obviously we're always working to innovate and give those guys in automotive and healthcare and oil and gas and whatever else the best chance they've got at having a clear-cut industry. Don't neglect yourselves, because whatever you do, you can implement it. You can literally improve other industries around the world as well. So there is a responsibility on you to take this seriously. Figen, before we move to audience questions, I just would like a bit of a summarising comment from you, really. If there's one key message that you would like people to leave here with today, what would it be?
There's actually two, if I'm honest. So one of them is, don't ever assume when you go to a concert, any venue, that security is a given, because it's at the moment not a given. You go in, you pay your money, and you take your life in your own hands, really, literally, if something was to happen. And the second message is, please don't ever think, although terrorism is very rare, don't ever think it can't happen to you. I always thought, when I looked at the news, oh my God, these poor people, look, something else has happened. And then I'd say, let's watch Chase instead. It's much more fun than the news. So I'd switch channels because I didn't want to hear. It wasn't real life, it just happened to people in films and on the news. And suddenly, in a split second, in exactly a third of a second, I became the news. And it's not a good place to be, I can assure you. It's life-changing.
Absolutely. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are using Slido for audience participation, and there's some questions that have come in already. If you don't have the Slido app, please go to slido.com. CONFEX20 is the code. So let's see what we've got on the screen in front of us. Some of them are a little bit broad. So I think, Nick, maybe we'll just fire the first one at you. What do you think is the biggest security issue at venues currently? Are you able to articulate that?
So I think the challenge is around defining venue, to be honest with you, and that's part of what the consultation needs to take account of. But I would say that the biggest challenge for anybody who has responsibility for operating a place or a space is understanding what the threat might be to them and even thinking about it as an issue, which kind of reinforces what Figen was just saying there, which is, you know what, I'm really optimistic it won't happen to most of you, but it might. And if terrorism doesn't happen to you, there'll be a violent event, I'm sure, and I'm sure some of you have experienced those at events, even if it's a couple of people at your conference getting drunk and having a fight. So I think for me the biggest issue is people not even understanding that it's an issue.
I've got one on my device here that I'm not sure if it's on the screen there, and it says there is technology out there that can detect hidden explosives and weapons. However, contracted security won't put in place as they can't handle the outcome. Is that something you're familiar with? The security?
So I spend yeah, I've got you. Okay. So I think there's two questions here. Is one is how does technology play out in security? And the other one is, what's the quality of the people we employ to operate and deal with responding to security? So I spend quite a lot of my time at events where people are selling things. And I think technology has a place in keeping people secure and safe, but technology is not the entire answer. And I've always felt far more comfortable in people playing a role within security. Now, one of the great challenges for the security industry is around the quality of the people that they employ. But I don't think that's their challenge. I think that's your challenge, because you want to pay them peanuts. If you pay them peanuts on your contract, that cost is going to get passed down the chain, and you're going to get what you can afford, or what they can afford to supply on that particular contract. The margins in security contracts are tiny. And I think the industry, or all industries that employ security, you've got to take a deep, hard, long look at yourself and say, is that the best thing I'm doing for the people that come and visit my venues, my events? But also, I'm sorry, there's something ethical about this as well. You know, I'm now self-employed, and occasionally I get paid peanuts. And it kind of hurts sometimes, and I've still got to make a living and support my family. So I think the two elements are there. You know, don't rely on technology, but definitely look at it. There is some amazing stuff out there. There are also an awful lot of snake oil salesmen. But from the man guarding perspective, or the human guarding perspective, we need people who are good, focused professionals. And organisations like the Security Institute, I don't know if they're represented here today, and the Chartered Institute for Security Professionals, they are trying to create career pathways so that people come into that basic man guarding position and can then see a career for which they can receive good reward and remuneration going forward. And I think that could make us the best security country in the world.
Figen, I'd like to aim the next question at you. What can we as individuals do to support Martyn's Law?
Okay. First of all, please follow us on Twitter, myself, Nick, Brendan Cox. We are sort of really advocating Martyn's Law, so any support on Twitter would be amazing. Secondly, if your business is being consulted by the government about Martyn's Law, don't see it as a big issue, embrace it as an empowering tool to have your say in how you want to manage your security within your organization. It's a good thing. And thirdly, do the ACT training from a personal point of view, not just organizational point of view. You never know, it may just save your life.
We'll have another couple of questions there. At the top, gaining popularity. Nick, I suppose this comes back to you again, I think. We have a crisis management plan in place. We've gone through all scenarios, but how do you plan for so many variables?
So I'm sad that's anonymous, because I'd like to see whoever that was and go and give you a big pat on the back and shake your hand. Because the fact that you've done that demonstrates to me you're thinking about it. And you're absolutely right, there are lots of variables, but probably not as many as you think. You know, there's an attack to blow up your building. There's somebody coming into your building doing something bad. There's somebody doing something bad to you on the street outside. The variables of that really aren't that great. It's effectively, is somebody trying to harm property, or is somebody trying to harm a person? And the fact that you've thought through some scenarios means, quite frankly, that in any scenario, you will probably take some of that learning into your response. It's those people who, perhaps for the very first time, have thought, oh my goodness me, what do I do now, are the ones who are going to be trying to scrabble for the right answers. And if I just give you a real example, so some of you may have even been caught up in this. Black Friday 2017, so at the end of that awful year of terrorist attacks, Oxford Street, a small fight started on Oxford Circus tube station, and it turned into thousands, if not tens of thousands of people rampaging in panic through Oxford Street and in and out the stores. Now, I've seen the video footage from inside some of those stores, and it is horrific. I've seen a guy jump off an escalator 1.5 floors up, breaks both his legs in 3 places, and then you see him crawling off into a corner because he thinks he's about to die. But throughout that, nobody was taking control. Nobody was saying, close the doors or open the doors or whatever sensible decision needed to be made at that time. And I guess the least I would ask people to do is just to think about, what if you were faced by that sort of mass panic in your event? What are you going to do? Are you going to hide under the counter and put a paper bag over your head, which, by the way, I did see on footage? Or are you going to say, right, get my tannoy, tell everybody to be quiet, stop running around, lock the doors, and then work it out slow time from there? I think the thing about variables is, you're absolutely right, you can chase yourself down rabbit holes. But if you go for that sort of sensible 3 or 4 good ideas, a bit of a brainstorm from people inside your business, because most of them know what the problems are, then you're always going to get the right answers. But whoever you are, well done. You're already leading the industry in thinking about it.
Figen, I'd like you to maybe remind everybody what the actual, the technical requirements of Martyn's Law are when it comes to. So I think this is what the first question is asking. Will Martyn's Law go into detail on what venues must do for events of a certain size? Will it mandate bag searches and so on?
Yeah, I think it would, but it's really important to bear in mind that it would be proportionate depending on the size and type of venue. You know, we wouldn't expect a small cafe or restaurant or pub to have metal detectors or metal detector arches. It could just be a simple bag search at a nightclub. It could, in a pub, just be maybe an extra camera or a door that's not been locked before that it's locked. It's simple measures, but it would be really proportionate. But the whole point of the consultation is to ascertain who needs to do what. That is the whole reason we're doing the government is doing the consultation.
And are we able to explain to the audience how they can get involved with the consultation and track its progress?
So the government on Monday announced that consultation would now go ahead, and those of you who follow the sometimes vagaries of Parliament will know that consultation is the first step in developing a parliamentary bill. What they didn't do at that point was decide exactly how they're going to do that. Not uncommonly, it's launched by a green paper on the respective department's internet site, and invitations are extended to anybody to comment on that green paper. That's a fairly common form of consultation. And then sometimes they're more targeted about it, where they'll go to representative bodies or outlets, media outlets, and ask your specific view. Certainly what Figen and I will be doing and do a lot of is make sure our face in the campaign continues to stay in the media, and at key events such as the launch of consultation, I have no doubt that you'll be getting bored with our voices again to make sure that people pick up the opportunity.
That's brilliant. I'm going to draw it to a close there, guys. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And I'm really hoping that the message of security resonates. Do please go and tell your colleagues and tell your peers in the industry. We must take this seriously, and we'll be covering this extensively in the next issue of Conference News as well. A round of applause, please, for Figen and Nick.